Whenever we hear or read about other people, our empathy takes over. Us humans have the everlasting desire to think or even feel for others.
So, whenever we see, hear, or read about someone, our thoughts and feelings travel to a world of imagination.
And we do it all the time, when imagining to be a superhero, a construction worker, or even a guy on the street. But what if a person is somewhat out of the ordinary?
Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be them? Well, we certainly have.
With this podcast series, we unravel stories of the sometimes fascinating, obsessed, inspiring, or outright strange folks that have wandered the edges of this earth. So, who this? Welcome to our podcast.
What would it take to change the world around you? Have you ever tried just asking? Journey with us today and find out about a man who did just that. I have come to loot with love. If you have 4 sons, consider me your 5th and give me my share. Hello everyone, this is Dane. I'm here with Joe and Martin, and today we're going to talk about somebody you probably never heard about. Everybody knows about Mahatma Gandhi. However, few outside of India know about another great soul who was his apprentice, who walked over 80,000 kilometers in just one of his campaigns to serve the people, and who was considered a veritable saint. Vinayak Narahari Bhave, aka Vinoba, was born on September 11, 1895, in Kagoli in Kaloba, in the Konkan region of the Maharashtra, in the middle part of India. He was the oldest of 5 children. His father was a weaver and a rationalist, as opposed to a spiritualist. And he was raised by his grandfather, Baba, and was spiritually influenced by his own mother. He was deeply moved at a young age after reading the Bhagavad Gita, a 700-verse of Hindu scripture. Vinoba, at the age of 10, vowed his life to lifelong celibacy and selfless service to people. In 1916, at the age of 21, he was also affected by a report in the newspaper of one of Gandhi's speech given at the Benares Hindu University. Influenced by the report, he was on his way to take an intermediate exam. And then, all of a sudden, he decided to burn all of his high school certificates and his college accolades and decided to write Mahatma Gandhi himself. He had this back and forth correspondence with Gandhi, who invited Vinoba to come visit him in his ashram in Ahmedabad. He became really involved in the activities of the ashram, like village industry and education and sanitation, etc. He was so dedicated that by 8 April of 1921, he was sent to the Wardha district to run one of Gandhi's ashram there. In Wardha, he started a magazine which had essays on the sacred Hindu treatises of the Upanishads. Vinoba had become very involved in peaceful resistance against the British rule, so much so that between 1930 and 1940, he was arrested 6 times for his participation in nonviolence resistance against them. In his times in jail, though, he became incredibly intelligent. He wrote 2 short books, learned 4 South Indian languages, created a script for the Lagnagari people, and gave talks about the Bhagavad Gita, some of which was written down and published. Gandhi made him the first participant in the 1940 nonviolence campaign and named him the Satagari, or the first person ever to be holding firmly to the truth.
What a G, dude.
Like from the age of 10, this guy was just like, I am not going to have sex with any woman. First of all, kudos to you for making that decision at 10 and sticking to it for the rest of your life. And then decided that he was going to be a selfless person to help people at the age of 10, right? And then had all of these accolades from his high school and college and decided, because his heart told him so, to give it all up.
You know, I burned all my school supplies after graduating high school, but no one cared.
Nobody. You didn't come on. You didn't become a revolutionary after that.
No, I guess no.
No, but you actually got your diploma and then destroyed them. You have to do it mid-education.
That's right.
I see.
Yes, he was on his way to take his intermediate exam. He wasn't on the level of like the final exam, right? But still, he decided like, I heard the speech from Gandhi. I read the speech from Gandhi, and I'm going to follow what I vowed 11 years ago. So I'm going to do that.
Do you know what the speech was about? What triggered him?
I do not. But if you know anything about Gandhi, it is always going to be about the service to the people and the fact that, of course, nonviolence resistance to the British rule, and the fact that, the people are supposed to be the ones who are having charge over their own destiny, right? He's always that type of speaker. I mean, Martin Luther King kind of spoke in that line.
Because I think if that's the case, then I think it would be good to sort of take us back to that context of the time, right? Because what was happening in India at the time was a very cruel British rule. So the British Raj is contrary to the myth that Britain actually gave India many gifts and that it was a golden era for Britain. Well, it might have been a golden era for Britain, but for many people living in India, it was a cruel and oppressive regime responsible for the death. And I had to find this online, but the death of an estimated 35 million Indians. And Britain apparently stole an estimate of nearly 45 trillion from India between the period of 1765 and 1938.
Wow. And we know India was never an underpopulated society.
No, it was like a quarter of the world's GDP back in the 1500s.
Yeah.
Like it was, it always has been massive.
Yeah, and you're stealing all of these resources from them. And so those who had resources were because of how they probably sucked up to the British rule in some way and kind of gave into certain things that other persons weren't able to do, right?
Yeah, and I just to tie in a bit more about that colonial history, I already knew that Churchill wasn't the greatest guy when it came to foreign policy.
Gives me bad vibes, this guy.
Yeah,
it's really terrible because one of the things that I found I knew that you were going to talk about Vinoba, of course. So I was like, okay, I know something about the British colonial history in India, but not enough. And then I came across this section of Churchill's decision to send grain from Bengal to Yugoslavia to increase the reserve stocks for the British Army. And that caused the Great Bengal Famine in 1943, which killed 4.3 million Indian people. And I mean, terrible as it already is, Churchill actually responded to that the famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits. And in response to the report that raised concern over the rising death toll in Bengal, Churchill wrote in its margin the dark-humored question, why hasn't Gandhi died yet? Extremely dark. And I think it portrays a little bit how India was seen by the Britons at the time and by the British leaders. Just something to serve the British Empire, not caring about the people living there.
Yeah, it's crazy that in the 1830s, Britain, outlawed slavery, right? The slave trade. But it seemed like even without that, they were doing all these atrocious things, cleaning their hands, having all of the benefits of these atrocious things, but none of the responsibility of taking care of the people that need to be taken care of, right? And about this time from the 1840s onwards, a lot of people were crying out for their own independence across the British Empire. And what happened there was among a host of different people in different countries trying to push back against the British abuses. Because you talk about what they did in India, I'm from Jamaica, I can talk about what they did in Jamaica, and I can talk about what they did in certain countries in Africa also. And so at that time, but what Winston Churchill was doing, especially to countries that they deemed to be beneath them, of people of certain skin tones, but also they were doing it to the Irish also. So there was a lot going on across the British Empire at the time. So after Mahatma Gandhi passed, though, everybody knows about Gandhi. Everybody, when they think about Indian liberation, they think about Gandhi. And again, I mentioned earlier that Martin Luther King took this nonviolent resistance movement and brought it to the United States. But after his death, of course, everybody's going to know the big name, but nobody knew about Vinoba. And so Vinoba took Gandhi's Saravadaya idea, which means uplifting, and formed a movement to uplift all of India. Here is a quote of how the movement saw itself. It says, "As its general features, it is a society for the freedom for all and utmost equality. There will be no classes, no exploitation, nor injustice, and equal opportunity for each for full development. Human beings will be the center of such a society, but self-interest will not be the basis of social organization." Of course, it's a big step to take. And they did push for it, and of course, Vinoba was one of those who was fully invested in this idea.
And how did he try to do this?
So here's his. So one of the biggest things that came out of this movement was when he formed what is called the Bhudan movement. So the Bhudan movement, it is said, was formed just by accident by Vinoba. And Bhudan means land gift. So it was a land gift movement. In Hyderabad, the capital of India's Telangana state, was particularly affected by social change and upheavals. Communist-inspired movements were executing landlords and taking away their land to give to the poor local people. And there were high tensions between the landowners and those without land. While Vinod was visiting the Pachampali, a small town in the Kishigiri district of the Tamil Nadu state, some Harijans that we know as Dalits approached him and told him that they wanted land from the landlords and that they supported violence because they saw no other recourse. They even said they would take just 2 acres and that would satisfy them. Just 2, not too much. So in a prayer meeting that very night, Vinoba pleaded with the landlords to give away some of their lands to the Harijans, and it was successful. He was given 100 acres that very night. Vinoba saw that he had something here and continued to do it. Within 2 weeks, this land gift movement became a nationwide movement. Vinoba spent 50 days in Hyderabad and amassed over 12,000 acres as gifts. He also walked 800 miles from Paunar in the central of India to Delhi, in which he got 17,000 acres just en route. In 5 years, he collected 5 million acres of land. The movement originally wanted 50 million acres in the same span of time, but Vinoba decided that these deadlines were arbitrary, and the movement really was about a morality of kindness and kindness between the classes.
I read about this bit too when I read about him, and I found it very impressive how his whole bit of sticking to the purpose of the movement. Because part of his reasoning was that any number he would give of like what to ask for was ultimately an arbitrary number that sort of pushed for more and was kind of like antithetical to human nature, because it was about the kindness and what they were naturally, let's say, willing to give without tension and like in good spirits. And so like he felt that like pushing for more, even though like, let's say an activist would, because that's my first reaction when I imagine someone who's fighting for a political or social cause. It's like the numbers are very important at the end of the day, because they measure like your achievement, they measure how much you're getting done for the cause, etc. and so forth. But he had the sort of discipline and presence of mind to be like, this is not why I started the movement. This is the number we've got because this is the number that this method that I believe in was able to get us. And he just, chose not to be disappointed by it. To completely accept it and to understand exactly why it happened this way. So I just, that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also very interesting because he just took a different approach. Instead of pleading to a government, pleading to the British rulers that more people should get land because they're dying without the land or they're suffering without the land, he actually went to big landowners and just pleaded with them, said, hey, you have so much land, most of your land you're probably not even using, donate it to me, and I will make sure that landless people have land.
Mm-hmm.
It's different, and like he didn't depend necessarily on the government to make those changes and wait on the government to make those changes, because it could have done that as well. It could have pleaded with them.
Yeah.
But probably he knew that that wouldn't work, given the fact that the British especially weren't there to benefit the Indian people.
Exactly. And he was been involved in that movement of nonviolence for so long.
Yeah, and forcing the government, not forcing the government, asking the government to then force people to give land away, even if justified, is a form of violence. You know, so he also just straight up didn't want to do that as well.
Yeah. And I think, again, I wanted, in my thought on things, it would seem like he did an evolution. And I'm not saying he evolved from Gandhi or anything, but he moved out of the idea that we're trying to overthrow the British on a national level and as such, but instead of trying to create a society from the ground up instead. And his actions seem to not consider the British any at all anymore. All right, he started to do actions that is saying that you are Indian, these are Indians, and we are people, and we need to be kind to each other, right? And that's how we will change the society and create a new society from within, instead of trying to bring down this society and trying to make, because what was happening after things were crumbling under the British's feet was that Indians were killing other Indians. Landowners were being murdered and then their lands taken away and given to the poor, sure. But he didn't see that as a move. Yes, poor people are getting what they needed, but he didn't see that as the move. He didn't see that it's not just about getting the land. It's about creating a society that people are kind to each other and are able to share things with those who don't have.
And it must have been incredibly difficult to navigate that society that was completely or almost completely opposite of what he wanted to change, right? Very big issues. One, you had the British rulers who definitely did not have the well-being of Indian people in mind and were very cruel in many ways. And you, of course, had the caste system within India that just made that there was so much hierarchy within society. And he was very opposed to that. But trying to change that system, trying to change multiple systems actually, because he was working on different levels, must have been incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
And, well, all the more inspiring to see that he was trying to change multiple systems towards this one dream of a better India.
Our boy was playing 4D chess.
He was playing, from the inside out chess, right? It wasn't everything that you see on the surface. And then he founded himself 6 ashrams in his day. And he found one just for women. This is how I knew that his idea was to start something to make it spread, because the idea of the ashrams that he created was to have a self-sustaining society within the society, and then spread the ideas of these ashrams to other small villages and so on. And so it would become like this domino effect that would create something new out of his life and out of his 10-year-old, when he was 10-year-old, his promise. And then he made this thing that was incredible. And nobody outside of India knows about it, because it was such an internal move that wasn't trying to challenge the power structure so much as it was trying to garner a new creation.
So what happened after this whole Buddhan movement period?
Well, after the Buddhan movement period, he went on to continue to teach. Again, I said he founded other ashrams, and he, again, was a spiritual leader up until the 1980s. I mean, he lived a long time. And on his deathbed. So they were trying to feed him. This is how much he believed in what he was done. On his deathbed, they wanted to feed him and give him medicine like they would do somebody who is dying. But he decided that he would follow a different way called the Samadhi Moran, where it's described as a Jainism. It's a practice of raising your consciousness above your bodily attachment to the things of this earth, and then going off into I don't want to use the word nirvana, but going off to some mystical plane of existence that's above life and death. And so he lived his spirituality. He taught his spirituality until on his deathbed, he still lived out what he thought his truth was. And the amount of people that showed up for his funeral was incredible. Incredible.
So just a question, what year did he die then?
In 1982, he passed away.
So he actually saw the British leave.
He saw all of that, yes.
Nice.
Nice.
So a question maybe would be, why don't we really know about this person that accomplished so much? Because he managed to get so much land for people that didn't own any land. It's such an act of heroism, in my eyes at least. But why don't we only know about Gandhi, and why have we, at least in the West, not heard about Vinoba at all?
There could be many reasons for this, but I think this didn't happen for him because he moved from being a highly political figure who was doing the nonviolence resistance against the British in their faces and getting arrested constantly, to a person who was trying to work from the people themselves and trying to get the people themselves to start an internal revolution. And nobody on the outside cares about that. The British don't care about that. The rest of the world don't care
also,
about
keep
it.
in
So
mind,
we only care about bad news.
it's not about bad news. I mean, probably yes, like in terms of, like social memory and like what gets popular at the moment. But also keep in mind, this is the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Like the West was afraid of communism. They were terrified. So someone who's out there, redistributing wealth and doing all these sorts of things that go against a capitalist system is also not something that a lot of, let's call it Western officials would be happy to share about in the first place.
Especially if it was successful, yeah.
But Gandhi was at least advocating for the same,
More or
right?
less, but people in the West remember him for the independence movements. In the same way that MLK was most remembered for civil rights, but at the same time, he was talking about like social reform, like economically, and no one really cares about that aspect.
No, and actually, some said when he started to talk about this, that's when everybody started to get uncomfortable and probably caused his death because of that. They didn't kill him for the political racism. Everybody should come together. But when it came to the economic talk, that was sounding too much like, oh, give the workers their rights. And
that's when he was murdered. And
when he was
not
murdered.
even Americans know this. And I think he would fit under the same umbrella of uncomfortable topics that are less easy to sell.
Yeah. Again, especially if it's being successful. Who is going to want to talk about a successful movement that looks so much like communism in a time when communism, to be called a communist, was a death sentence and a pariah, right? And so who would want to say, oh, but actually here's one that's working? No. And of course, Vinoba didn't see himself as a communist in any shape, way, or form. But it looked too much like you're distributing land, you're taking land from the rich and giving it to the poor, even though the communists were doing the same thing, but they were actually murdering people. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people were talking about that. See, communists are murdering.
Yeah, he would also really not be a communist in the sense of, the Soviet Union was still a violent autocratic state, and he was really, really trying to avoid the whole violence bit.
Absolutely trying to avoid it. Yeah. So that's who he was.
Nice.
Nice.
And do you have any takeaways on this particular story, on this particular person?
My takeaway is this. This guy made a promise from the age of 10. Celibacy.
No girls allowed.
No girls allowed. So that's my takeaway. I'm kidding.
No girls allowed. What else?
No. Yes. So here's my takeaway. This guy made a promise at the age of 10. He made 2 promises. The first is he was going to live his life in celibacy. The second is that he was going to serve people until the day of his death. He was going to give his life in the service of people. A 10-year-old making that promise and then stuck to that promise until the day of his death. Now, in that time of 10 years old, probably was one of the most pure time for him. It was probably for most of us, the most we ever felt like ourselves was in that area, right? Stay true to yourself. Stay true to yourself, because the stuff in the beginning that you thought was childish, the stuff in the beginning that you thought was true, and the stuff in the beginning that you look back now and think is something of the bygone era might be where your true greatness, your true excellence lie. Look to that person, stick to that person, and it's always going to be in the service of something beyond yourself. And that's what you are going to find, your true excellence. Thank you for walking with us today on this journey. Catch us on any of your podcast platforms and join us next time for another interesting story.